Good afternoon, everybody. Back in the day, people used to be able to make a living off of a lot less cattle, a lot less land. But let's look at the cattle industry specifically. And why is that the case? It used to be you could take, 10, 20 cows and you could either have your own little farm auction. And I also know a lot of people who used to take them to like the old stockyards, whether that be in Omaha, Sioux City, St. Joe, Missouri. Like there used to be these big stockyards, and it's a lot different now. Back then, it was a really, really, really big deal to take your cattle, 60 to 100 miles. Like anymore, that happens like every single day. There was more pasture around available. People could get by selling their cattle locally because really, if you weren't selling your cattle to a local sale barn, there was no other big buyer unless you took them to a stockyard. When your great grandparents took their cattle to a stockyard, or even let's say a local sale barn, it probably wasn't like a big feeder buying those cows. A lot of them got sectioned off and sold to your neighbors who didn't have cattle, and they would buy, a couple of them and they would fatten them up themselves. And so it was really an old version of direct consumer. We were also selling to kind of our area. If you went to the stockyards, that was kind of the big place where it got sold, and cattle would get dispersed. There'd be big buyers that would come up and they would disperse it across the country to different areas where cattle might not be, as available. And then they would just pretty much either have some sort of processing way, the big buyers would, of themselves. They'd have their own processor, or they would just sell them at other sale barns in the areas that they dispersed them. Just so much different. Where now is almost all the cattle are funneled to these big packers. Does that make sense? Like, let me just walk through a little bit more how it would go. So let's say, my grandpa had 12 head and he took them to a local sale barn or did an auction on their own ground. The neighbors would gather around, and the small town people, the people in the city that were closer, there's lots of small towns within, 20, 30 miles of here. They would go to those sale barns, and they didn't just have this big Walmart to go buy beef. They had a local grocery store, but they could only hold that beef for so long. So they would go to the sale barn and buy a steer or buy a couple cows, and they would just buy from somebody who had more cows and buy what they needed for their family just to fill the freezer, and they'd fatten up themselves, and then they'd either butcher it themselves or they'd take it to a local butcher, and there probably wasn't very many of those available. So people were doing a lot more of the old school direct to consumer back then. Instead of buying the beef, they were buying the livestock just before it was fattened and doing the fattening themselves. A lot more people had these small acreages where they could do that. They weren't living in apartments in the city. They were living on a small acreage, didn't have enough land to have their own cattle, but they had enough that they could hold, 1 or 2 steers just to fatten up for their family. And they could do this periodically throughout the year. You're talking about the consolidation. More and more people wanted beef. In the city or on the coast, we know that the packers are getting this processing done, massive processing done, and dispersing beef off to more and more people. That adds to the demand of beef, which is good. There's exporting of American beef, which can be good. But at the end of the day, the system ultimately encouraged feedlots to keep getting bigger and bigger because it was easier from a packer to go to a big feedlot and just buy out what they needed. They didn't have to go to all these little farms and pick and choose and negotiate with all these little farm and family ranchers. They could just literally go to instead of your stockyard, they could go to a big feedlot and they could buy all their cattle there. And it really just consolidated to the point to make it easier to get more beef out to more people. And that isn't coherently a completely bad thing. But what it did was it made it harder for these family ranchers to survive. That took away their competitive advantage, and it put the competitive advantage in the hands of people with more beef, more industrial size feedlots. But that doesn't mean that I think beef is dead. No, I think if you work at building some direct-to-consumer beef on the side, starting a small, direct-to-consumer beef business on the side, I think you're going to increase the profit for your family ranch. I think it is still doable. I don't think beef is dead, but this is a little explanation of some of the things that have changed in the beef industry. But I think that family ranchers can still be profitable, and I'm going to prove it with these 3 steers, and I'm going to prove it and show a little bit more of our family ranch on this channel, put out some more different topics on here. I know I've really hammered this topic a lot, but I've had some more interest in it. Agri Summit is growing. We're getting more members in that. So if that interests you, check that out in the description. But with that being said, guys, if you have a topic you want to learn about, if you have a topic you want me to talk about, I can find the information if I don't have it. Let me know. The more subscribers, the more you push these videos, the better my channel grows, the more time and effort I can put into it. And I really appreciate you guys. On this channel, we are for family ranchers and family operations, and helping keep rural America alive. I'll see you guys in the next one. God bless.